Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
Hey there, before we get started, I just want to record a real quick disclaimer. We discuss a very controversial subject here, religion and theology. And there is such a thing as toxic religion. There's such a thing as bad theology that can cause people great harm. I believe that religion can do a lot of good. It has done a lot of good in the world. But what the purpose of me doing this episode was help people to examine where they are, to understand where their religion might have come from, to understand the implications of that, and then to make a decision on your own how it works for you. So I hope that this episode accomplishes what we set out to do, which was to have a conversation and to open some things up and to let you decide for yourself where you fall on it. I do highly recommend both of Jeremiah's films. I've seen them. They are excellent, and they are very thought-provoking. Have a good one.
Okay.
Hey everybody, this is Brian Smith back with a special episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me two very special guests, Dr. Terri Daniel and Jeremiah Camara. And I'm going to read Jeremiah's introduction and I'll let Terri introduce herself. Jeremiah is a director and producer of the documentary film Contradiction, A Question of Faith, which examines the saturation of churches in African-American communities coexisting with poverty and powerlessness. Contradiction can be viewed on Amazon Prime Video. Camara is also the author of the books Holy Lockdown, Does the Church Limit Black Progress? And The New Doubting Thomas, The Bible, Black Folks, and Blind Belief. Jeremiah is also the creator of the widely watched YouTube video series Slave Sermons, a mini-movie series addressing the harmful effects of religion. His latest and upcoming documentary, which is actually out now, is titled Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism in America. Holy Hierarchy explains how the presumptions of a supreme being in colonial America led to precepts and beliefs in supreme human beings, and how these beliefs morphed their way into the legal system and ultimately turned racism into an institution. So I want to welcome Jeremiah, and Terri, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm Terri Daniel. I work with Brian on many different projects, most notably the Helping Parents Heal project. And we do some podcasts also for the Afterlife Conference and this, that, and the other thing. And we kind of discovered Jeremiah together and got so excited about his work that we said, let's put him on a podcast because we're very excited about it. So we hope you love him too.
Yeah. So Jeremiah, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background?
Well, I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. You're there in Westchester.
Mm-hmm.
We got to Westchester not too often. You know, up north, everything is really close. But when we went to Westchester, you know, we had to take an overnight bag and a toothbrush. You know, come down here to Atlanta was a little shock because you can't even go visit your dentist without doing 40, 50 miles. So Westchester now would be around the corner.
Yeah.
But I was born and raised there, and I was I attended one of the largest Black churches in the state of Ohio at that time. It was called Tridestone Baptist Church. It's still a pretty big church. I guess you would consider it a mega church. I think it's been surpassed by a few churches now. And I had parents that were somewhat liberal. You know, they were believers, they were Christians, of course, but they didn't force it on us. Mm-hmm. We could go to church if we wanted to. If we didn't want to, we didn't have to. It wasn't mandatory that we attended church. And but I still wanted that feeling that I saw in church. I saw people speaking in tongue, and I saw people shouting. I needed that because I was like, you know, what is it that makes you do this type of thing? To me, you know, it was John Coltrane, you know, it was Thelonious Monk, it was Earth, Wind, and Fire. Those things gave me that type of feeling. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, well, what is it that you all have that can make me feel the way that music makes me feel? Because I grew up, you know, my father was a little older, so I was exposed to jazz at a very early age. You know, in elementary school, I was listening to, you know, Charlie Parker and people like that. Mm. And so, you know, of course, I would get laughed at. But, of course, we had the funk. Cincinnati and Dayton, I think, is the home of funk, the heart and home of funk music in the United States and probably the world. But I wanted to know what type of feeling, what was producing those kinds of feelings. So I left and moved to Cleveland at 20 years old, I believe. And I started attending church, you know, 2 or 3 days a week. I lived with the preacher. I was hanging out with church people, and I wanted to speak in tongue. Mm-hmm. And I found myself, you know, 21 years old. I had the lights off from Friday night to Saturday night with Pentecostalism, studying, you know, Herbert Armstrong, wow, and people like that. So I was really deep into it, and a guy invited me to attend church with him, and he was talking about how dynamic his preacher was, and that if I really wanted to speak in tongue, and I really wanted this experience, I needed to attend his church to visit his pastor, see what his pastor was preaching about. So I did that, and I couldn't wait. I was like, finally, I'm going to see, you know, this is it. And when I went there, they sang for about an hour, which is quite common. But then after the singing, I was still enthusiastic and still waiting on this, you know, thing to drop from the sky. And the whole time he was just saying all of the things that I had already heard. You know, he's a doctor in the sick room. He's a lawyer in the courtroom. He may not come when you want him, but he's always right on time. Greater is he that is in me. I mean, the same things I had been hearing. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking, this can't be. I can't be. Maybe I'm hearing something incorrectly. So then I started visiting other churches. And I would visit a church every week, of course, on Sunday, different churches on Wednesday. The ones that were open on Friday, I would visit. I was going to church, again, 3 and 4 times a week, but this time as a visitor. And I noticed I was hearing the same thing that I had been hearing since I was 5 and 6 years old. So I came back to Cincinnati, stayed for a while, met my wife there, and we decided to move to Atlanta in 95 or 96. And I noticed that if you didn't go to church here in Atlanta, it was a felony. You know, you were really committing a crime. You didn't go to church in Ohio, it's okay. But down here in the Bible Belt, you were really, you know, committing a deep crime not going to church. And I realized people would ask you what church you went to before they would ask you your name. Mm-hmm. And then I saw these big mega churches, and I knew that church was big business. And I had also remembered what I had experienced in Ohio, and I started putting these things together, and then again started visiting these churches here in Atlanta. And again, I was hearing the same things I've been hearing since I was 5 or 6 years old. Maybe louder, maybe more bombastic way, but essentially the same things. And I was really disappointed because, you know, I had a view of the world that, you know, things were possible, and there were information was coming in so many different directions from different places, and I couldn't be confined only to this teaching of the church. And so I knew the time had come for me to write a book, and that led to my first book, Holy Lockdown: Does the Church Limit Black Progress?
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a fascinating background, and I can relate to so much of what you said. I grew up as a Pentecostal, and my grandfather actually was the founder of the church that I went to. So wow. I went through some of the same experiences, and you know,
Your grandfather was the pastor.
Yeah, my grandfather was the pastor and the founder of the church.
So congratulations for being on this podcast, man.
Well, you know, it's an interesting legacy. It's been an interesting journey. But I wanted to be baptized when I was a little kid because I was scared of going to hell. They're like, if you're not baptized, you're going to hell. So I'm like, let's do this. So I was baptized at like 13 spoken tongues. You know, the whole thing. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying.
I never got to do that.
Wow. And I am like so the odd man out here because my family, I was raised in a Jewish family, but they were totally secular. And anytime they ever said anything about God, it was like wink, wink and roll their eyes. It was all a big joke, like clean your room or God will punish you. That was it for my religious upbringing. And so I came to be interested in this topic because I didn't understand why everybody was so scared of this stuff and so scared of hell, because I never got any of that growing up, just absorbing it from the culture. And now I help people get over it. So
wow. Well, that's interesting because I grew up in a Black and Jewish, pretty much half and half area in Cincinnati, North Avondale in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And my Boy Scout leader was Jewish. My baseball coach was Jewish. I've been to 3 or 4 bar mitzvahs. And so, you know, I would spend the night over my friend's house whose maid that he had was cousins with the Jacksons. You know, Michael Jackson. I never knew how big that would be, but it's funny. And they never were religious. They just never talked about religion.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, Pentecostalism, Ryan, I want to ask you, to me, that's along with I would say, probably because holiness and Pentecostal are pretty much the same, but mm-hmm. Jehovah's Witness and Pentecostalism to me would be the hardest ones to kick because they come at you so differently. They say, well, we don't call him Jesus. We say Jehovah, and we worship on Saturday, like Pentecostalism a lot. Holiness. We wear dresses. We don't wear pants, and we don't do this. And we have a very I guess you would say demonstrative approach to our
it's
our faith and stuff like that. So it's real hard to kick because they already feel like they're on a different path than your average, you know, Christian.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting as you said. I was thinking about the parallels between that and say the Israelites. They separated themselves from the culture. Now, my family, well, they were kind of like that because it was like women couldn't wear pants. We weren't supposed to go to the movies. We weren't supposed to obviously drink. You know, play cards. We could play cards, but they had to be rook. You couldn't play with a regular playing deck. So yeah, there's this whole culture, this whole thing of being, you know, separate from the world, which does make it hard to kick in a sense. But and also the whole hell thing just never sat right with me. The whole thing that everybody else is going to hell, and it was everybody else. It was, you know, not only Jews and non-believers, but Catholics, because Catholics weren't baptized the right way, and Catholics didn't speak in tongues. So I'm like, you know, are 98, 99% of people in the world going to hell? What kind of God is this? So that always bothered me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
Absolutely.
So I have a question for both of you about that. I just recently learned in Catholicism about how there are multiple levels of purgatory. There's not just one.
I think it's about 9.
Yeah, and like one of them is where the babies go if they die before they had a chance to get baptized. So in the background that both of you came from, there isn't a purgatory, right? You just go straight to hell. No. There's no levels. There's no conditions.
No, purgatory is a cop-out. It's binary.
Absolutely.
It's one or the other. It's heaven or hell. And but it was interesting because they would have these little like caveats that aren't really in the Bible, like these little loopholes. For example, babies. No one can really believe babies are going to go to hell. So we had this thing called the age of accountability. So there was a certain point where you got to the point where you were able to make a decision, for yourself. But this is not biblical. This was just something that people, I think, with their common sense said, there's got to be some sort of a loophole here. God can't be sending babies to hell.
Was that just in your church, or is that in the denomination?
I don't think it's really an official doctrine. It's just something, like I said, when people would start to question some of these things, would say, well, there's, don't worry about, because again, I was a little kid. I was taught this from the time I could speak. So at like 5 years old, I'm like, when are you going to get me baptized? Because I don't want to go to hell. And they're like, well, you're too young. And I'm like, well, I'm old enough to go to hell. So, let's just do this.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was terrified of going to hell. I remember meeting a guy, he lived across the street from me. His name was Stanley Wills. He was a few years older than I was. This is really, I left this part out when you talked about my upbringing, but this was monumental in where, leading where I am now. But he lived across the street from me. He was a few years older than me. His name was Stanley Wills. And so I was about maybe 13, 14, probably 13, because it was the summer. And it was before I went to 9th grade. So anyway, Stanley asked me, was I a Christian? And I said, yeah, I believe in Jesus and all this. And he told me how wrong I was if I still did this, if I still said this, and if you watch this and all this kind of stuff. And I was really interested, him being older than me. Of course, I was very attentive. And he told me something. He says, there's a part in Revelations where he showed me where they're going to be gnashing of teeth. And boy, when I read that, I went home that night and I had my head buried under the covers and I was sweating. And I said from that day forward, and I wrote a little letter, to God, as if I could mail it, but I wrote a letter. And it says, God, when I die, I want you to look at me and say, a job well done.
Yeah.
I need this to happen in my life, you to say a job well done.
Yeah.
So where we are now, I understand where people are. And I've been able to connect with them in a way because I do understand the religious trauma.
Yeah. I'm really glad to hear you have that background. And I think it's important that people understand that when they watch your films, understand, you're coming out of this. You talked about, I remember getting, my cousins and I got a hold of the Bible and read the book of Revelation one day at their house. I remember being in the bathroom reading this book and it terrified me. And I was terrified. I was like, I couldn't believe, just like you were saying, it was worse than any Stephen King novel I've ever read in my life.
Yeah. And it comes out of nowhere. If you study the origins of the Bible and how the Bible was created, it, supposedly was written by some dude alone on an island who was delusional and insane. And it doesn't relate to any of the other books or any of the history. It just flies in from some somebody's crazy mind out in the universe, and somehow it got included in the canon.
Yeah, and
because it's so scary.
It's important because it's apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
We need revelation to really scare you to the degrees that we want to. Books like Daniel,
Yes.
and all these apocalyptic type books. Jehovah's Witnesses are very, very aware, and they promote Daniel and Revelations to like no other sect of Christianity. So it's an important book. When you're talking about monsters and 7 heads and swallowing you up in hellfire and things like that, it's enough to drive people to the point, where I say that religion actually has perverted our brains. I think religion is a perversion of the brain. If we look at New York City right now, with all of these buildings, all these skyscrapers, if we were to just leave New York alone, if humans left and just leave, in 1,000 years or so, or less, I don't know, but in significant time passing, it will become a rainforest if you would just leave it alone. It's like our brains. If you were to just leave our brains alone and stop messing with it, it would revert to thinking properly. Because the only way that we can believe something, like there's, a God watching me right now, watching you guys, there's a lady in Switzerland that he's watching, there's a basketball team playing somewhere that he's praying that he hits the shot, and he's watching all these people at the same time. And the only way the brain can accept something like without proof, without evidence, is if it's consistently indoctrinated. So I need it Wednesday, I need it Friday, I need it Saturday, I need it every Sunday, of course. I need to hear from my peers. I need to see it on TV. I need to see the athletes making the sign of the cross before they go into the game. I need to see Tim Tebow like this. I need to see this constantly. And when you see these things and hear these things on a consistent basis, and you're indoctrinated on a consistent basis, it has a way of perverting your brain over time, because your brain has now relegated itself to a 3-pound ball of gray matter that doesn't use reason and doesn't use logic and doesn't think. And that's not what it is. You're supposed to think, but it's been perverted by religion.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. So if everybody was left alone, like New York abandoned and going back to the rainforest, I imagine that what humans would come to on their own with all the religious stuff erased would be some sort of nature-based spirituality, where I think left to our own devices, we might start in creating sky gods, because the sky, the sun, and the rain is the most powerful thing we know. It's what gives us life, the crops coming out of the ground. That's all we need. That's the only kind of belief system I would think that you'd ever need. And that's what we did create, way in the beginning, before it became political and we had leaders and prophets and all this stuff. It was, the sun was God, the rain, If it's raining and the crops are growing and the people have food to eat, everything is right with the universe. And if there's no rain and it's drought and people are dying and there's no crops, something's wrong. And so maybe we should do a rain dance or something to get things balanced again. And to me, that's like the beginning and end of all you need. That's religion right there. That's good religion. Anything beyond that is just politics.
Well, Terry, is that you just touched on what you and I were discussing the other day about the Hebrew scriptures and how political that people started becoming. And I think for me, I still have a faith of a kind, if you will, but it's more based on reason and evidence. I still believe that we're spiritual beings, having a human experience. I do believe that, but politics, I think the power structure is what, and in Jeremiah, this is what you touch on in your films. It's the power structure. It's the fact of making one group of people bow down to another group of people, saying that we are superior because we have God on our side. So that's to me where religion kind of falls off the rails.
Yeah, and religion and church have always been joined at the hip. There's never been any separation. Like the Bible is not this organic document that comes from the trees. To have a Bible, you need ink, you need paper, you need the government, you need attorneys, you need the approval, I should say, of the government. There's a lot of things that have to line up in order for you to have this book that became the greatest selling book of all time, And as far as faith is concerned, like you were talking about, Terry, having faith in the sun and the rain and things like that. People say, well, what am I going to have faith in? Well, have faith in those things that have already proven themselves to be faith worthy. I have faith that night will come tonight. I have faith that winter will come. I have faith that spring is going to come in March. Mm-hmm. I have faith that the oxygen will still be here for us to breathe. I have faith in those things that have proven itself to be faith worthy. So you can't talk about, like I say, Christianity to me is white supremacy. That's what Christianity is. You can't really talk about racism without talking about Christianity and white supremacy. You can't talk about white supremacy without talking about the Bible and the role that the Bible has played. It is our first teacher that there are differences that need to be dealt with, that there are favorite groups in the eyes of this God. Mm-hmm. And so it teaches us this separation. And, in the film Holy Hierarchy, it has many examples of how Christianity and racism and white supremacy are joined. They're inextricably linked. And I know that's painful for a lot of people. But I mean, this past Holy Day season that we just were in, we look at some of the things that we may see as non-threatening or innocuous. If you look at a white nativity scene, and with this baby Jesus, that is a very racist implication, because you're teaching your children what race God belongs to, who's supreme, who isn't supreme. And you see all of this iconography that exists. I can go in Walmart right now and see candles with a white Jesus that's on it. During this Christmas season, you saw so much white iconography in Walmart. And I tell people, Jesus is white. So, Brian, you can tell that Black Hebrew Israelites, to get a grip, he's not Black. And the reason why he's white is because he's white in Walmart, okay? Yeah. Right. Walmart is the largest retailer. It doesn't matter what you think. What matters is perception. So you have millions of people that go in Walmart and go in Walgreens. I can go in Walgreens and CVS right now and look at the magazine rack, and some of them will have religious, and you'll see a white Jesus there. Yeah. So it's the perception that matters. You can go to the various airports around the country. Hobby Lobby is one of the most Eurocentric stores that you can ever go in. It tells you that white is supreme. As soon as you walk in the Hobby Lobby, you're going to get that. Mm-hmm. And so if you're Black and you're working there and you don't have, your racial esteem intact, you're going to be really affected by it. So I think that when we look at religion and we connect it to white supremacy, and we look at the laws, because you would not have had Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a law. Apartheid was a law. So you don't have racism unless you have laws. And these laws became laws because of belief in a supreme being. It's an easy transition when you believe in a supreme being to believe in a supreme human being.
Right.
And so your God is going to look like, you know, if your God comes from your area, he's probably going to look like you.
Yeah.
And so that has been imposed on everybody else. And it's done immeasurable psychological damage to those people who do not fit those descriptions. And the sad part is that blacks will say, oh, what difference does it make what color? And see, they don't really get it. We're not talking necessarily always about the color. We're talking about what you're implying with this.
Mm-hmm.
The supremacy and the inferiority notions that you are applying with iconography, because the image always speaks louder than the words.
And marketing is everything. You know, it really stood out for me in Holy Hierarchy, where you had the clip of that little boy who got really famous because he had a near-death experience. They made a movie about him.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
And he's sitting there going, and I sat on Jesus's lap, and he had sky blue eyes and long brown hair.
Right.
And that movie and that book sold millions. And that's the messaging that people are getting. That's the teaching that everybody gets.
If you had saw a black Jesus from birth, you would not have had that same story.
Yeah.
You know, as a child. This was embedded into your consciousness. And so there are people, you know, if I'm walking down the street and someone, you know, a white person does something to me simply because I'm black or does some violence toward me, that's a hate crime. I wouldn't call that racism, because we're all prejudiced to some degree. But when we go to court and it's backed by law, it becomes racism, because racism is the legal backing of a person's prejudice and bigotry, and stereotype, you know, and ignorance. It's legally backed. Yeah. And so we are now a products of society where racism has been legally backed. Just like gold once gave the dollar its value. It was the God fantasy, this God that gave them their value as white people to treat you in such a way that you create a whole institution of racism. And it all started with belief, religious belief. That is the crux of racism in this country.
I'm just curious if, go ahead, Brian.
I think, Jeremiah, you made some excellent points there. And I really wish I could get everybody to watch both of your films, because whether you 100% agree with them or not, I think especially the second film explains white privilege better than maybe anything I've seen. And trying to get this point across to people that it's systematic, that it goes back hundreds of years, that just because slavery ended 150 years ago doesn't mean any of this stuff it was over. I mean, we still had Jim Crow, and we still have things today. And like you said, the iconography is extremely important. And when you were talking about the nativity scene, my neighbor has a nativity scene: white Jesus, white Mary and Joseph, wise men are black.
Yeah, you might have a black in the nativity.
Yeah, so
you might have him somewhere, but he's not the main character.
He's not the holy one. He's the holy people are white.
Let's don't get it.
And the wise men technically should be Asian, shouldn't they?
Right, exactly. According to our IQs, they should be. But yeah,
I think that.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I mean, they came from the East. They would have come from like India or Tibet. You know, they would have been some sort of Asian.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, just to traverse those mountain ranges, take a lot of know-how to do.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not in Tibet and Nepal and places like that, and cultivating rice and not know what you're doing. You have to have had a lot of knowledge just to be in those regions to begin with, to traverse those mountains.
But I think it's really interesting how we were talking, again, Terri and I were talking about the Hebrew scriptures the other day, what we call the Old Testament, Christians call the Old Testament. And it's interesting how the Europeans co-opted that and somehow identified with the Israelites, who were the people who were the downtrodden people, but they were the chosen people, right? So the Europeans take that and they say, well, we're the ones dominating everything, but we are the chosen people too. We're actually the chosen people. And then when the slaves read the Bible, they identify with the Israelites because they were the ones that were actually enslaved. So there's got this whole mishmash of things going on. But yeah, the people just co-opted Christianity, in my opinion. Because if you look at Jesus was killed by the state, so he was not hand in hand with the government. It was exactly the opposite.
Well, and I say, Brian, that people like myself and people like you and people like Terri, if you think about it, I can speak for me. I just know what I do throughout the year. I don't really participate in a lot of the culture of this country. You know, I don't do Christmas. I don't do the Halloween and things like that. I live a Jesus kind of life. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even a believer. I found 21, 22 saviors with the same story of Jesus. Mama named Mary, or a derivative of the word Mary, died on the cross, called themselves the light of the world, ascended to heaven, was born of a virgin, had 12 disciples. This is a very old motif. So there's nothing original about Jesus, but he came at a time where, you know, Romans were in power and they can enforce this on you, okay? But when you look at my life and my peers, we live the life, you know, because it says turn the other cheek. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, do they just mean turn the other cheek in a physical way? What about turning the other cheek to the ways of this culture? Mm-hmm. Because they have taken us off the natural cycle. Like, you're trying to convince me that this is New Year's. Here we are, January 23rd, I think it is, and we're in the dead smack of winter, and you want me to think that this is a new year? Mm-hmm. There's right. No new leaves blossoming on the trees. There's no new bugs emerging from the ground. There's no new flowers blooming and things like that. You're in the dead smack of winter. So they've taken a lot of the things, you know, that and have perverted them. Nature. You look at July the 4th. Frederick Douglass told us as a black man how you were mocking us on July the 4th. When they put July the 4th in, black people were still enslaved. We don't give the same attention to Juneteenth as we do July the 4th.
Right, right.
So, I mean, we don't even call it Thanksgiving. I mean, maybe show me a Pequot Native American that celebrates Thanksgiving, and maybe I will too. That was a time when 1,000 of them were slaughtered. You know, so these days, so I don't take part in a lot of these things. But you take these Christians that are so godly, they do every damn thing. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And here it is. I'm not a believer. I don't even acknowledge Jesus' existence. There's no evidence of him, although you could find people that can so-called claim evidence, but they'll say this is most likely where Jesus lived. There's nothing definitive about where he lived. I mean, we could say the white sequin glove of Michael Jackson and the blue suede shoes of Elvis, but you couldn't even say the wood that Jesus was at the stake on, or the nails. You would think you would have the foresight to save those things. But when you abandon these beliefs, to me, is where I found my freedom.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. We were talking about Jesus just then. I was thinking about, you know, the Gospels. There's a gospel that a lot of people don't know about called the Gospel of Thomas, which was left out of the Bible. And Jesus was countercultural enough if you read the New Testament, I think, properly. But if you read the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus was all about the kingdom is within you. You know,
absolutely.
So that's the Jesus. I am a follower of Jesus, by the way. I don't call myself a Christian anymore, but I am a follower of Jesus. Whether he existed or not, I'm a follower of the spirit of Jesus.
Oh, absolutely. Whether he existed or not, his ways set an example for us. Mm-hmm. You know, like I said, the more that I have gotten into this, the more I see that I actually live that type of life that he would have embraced, or that he would have approved of. Mm-hmm. I don't participate in any of these things. Certainly, Jesus would not have stood in line for a damn Popeye's chicken sandwich for 2 hours. You know, when he knows the chicken industry and how the chickens are treated. You can't mass produce chicken that way without having all of these antibiotics and hormonal things and growth hormones that they need to make this mass chicken. So he wouldn't do a lot of things. He wouldn't partake in a lot of the music that is objectifying, you know, and things like that. I mean, I love all types of music. I definitely prefer jazz music because it's improvisation. It's improvised, meaning it's important at the moment. It is a momentary art form, which you have to have certain mastery over your instrument.
Mm.
So I get that. I think that if there was a Jesus, he would have probably been into something like that as well, where there was not demarcated. It was not for commercial use. So if you love it, you buy it. I mean, the greatest selling jazz album of all time was 1959, Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. But it was still improvisational, which I definitely see Jesus liking something like that.
So here's what I'm curious about. You know, I'm a theologian. I have degrees in theology. I've studied how the Bible was constructed, and I am wondering what you think about when in this whole process of history did Jesus become white? Because when you think about it, there is not one white person in the entire Old or New Testament. Not one character in any of those stories would have been a white Caucasian person. They would have all been Middle Eastern and North African, around that area. So when the Romans started taking all the pagan holidays like solstice and superimposing Christmas over it and that whole thing, so the Romans would have been the introduction of white people, right? Does that sound right? And
Yeah.
so that's where those depictions would have begun, like the Renaissance with the paintings and the stuff that we didn't have before, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you own the store, you can put whatever images and artwork that you want in there. You own the store. You have the power, you know.
So it was the Romans. I mean, they made Jesus look like them, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Because, like I said, when you own the store, you own the operation, so forth, you're going to make him look like you. He's from your region. So obviously, God, like Daryl Ray said in the film Holy Hierarchy, if your God is from your area, you know, he's probably going to look like you.
And speaking of Daryl Ray, I'm going to interrupt and put a plug in here, Brian, if I may, for the conference on religious trauma, where Daryl is going to be speaking. Jeremiah is going to be speaking there. I'm going to be speaking there. It's coming up in Vancouver, Canada, April 23rd, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah.
And the website for that is CORT, Conference on Religious Trauma 2020.com. CORT, court2020.com. So anyone who's listening, who's interested in this topic, come and join us.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
You know, the thing about it, and that conference, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm glad you plugged it. When you think about it, because I was just in Madison, Wisconsin, speaking at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, right? And we had 700 people. I think there were like 4 or 5 Black people, okay? And which is okay, but it's perplexing because Black people should be at that event in droves.
Yeah.
They should be there. And I think that Black people should be the least, not only the least religious people, but the most skeptical people of a God that there is. And the reason I say that is because of the history. You know, you got certain groups that want to talk about this, what God that we had in Africa before we came to America. And there were many Blacks that were already here. Forget what you hear about Christopher Columbus, but many Blacks were already in this country. But that's another topic. But no God kept you off that slave ship.
Right.
No God kept you from being enslaved for hundreds of years. No God prevented the prison industrial complex from happening. You're still on the bottom, you know, of society. So if anybody should be skeptical of a God, it ought to be Black people. What has he done?
Well, so, you know, I loved what you did in your first film where you asked all these people, what's more important, the blood of your ancestors or the blood of Jesus? And they all said, the blood of Jesus. And I wonder that too, like, what's the reason why so many Black people cling so hard to this religion?
You know,
well, it goes back again to, I think it was covered in the film as well, is that we've been taught to defer happiness. That's part of the whole game. It's like, you don't need to be happy here. You're going to be happy by and by, you know, in the sky. So you just kind of, you look forward to heaven, and right now we just have to deal with what we have to deal with. But there's so many mixed messages because, I think Black people, again, when the slaves are reading the Bible, they identify with the Israelites, even though the masters were saying, okay, well, this is great because now you're saved. At least you know Jesus. And they're like, but yeah, we're literally in bondage. I mean, we're literally in chains and being whipped and murdered. But they're like, yeah, but you know Jesus. But on the other hand, they said, but you're not quite human. So that's why we can keep you enslaved, because you're not really fully human.
Right, exactly. That was the whole justification for it. I think Anthony Penn made a very poignant statement in the film Holy Hierarchy when he said, considering Blacks' history, why wouldn't you think that you were the people, the Hyksos, or the people, that got slaughtered? Why do you think that you're the ones that God is speaking to? You don't have that type of history. If Black people were to invent a God, like this God in the Bible is simply a character. He's a character in a book. That's pretty much it, because all the people that he associated with, if you don't have Moses, if you take away, without the Bible, is your source of information where you're getting about your God, what he likes, what he dislikes, where he goes, what he does, etc. If the information about your God is found in this Bible, well, if you take the Bible away, then that essentially means that you take your God away as well. Where is he now? Because you learned about him through this book. And I'm trying to figure out if what you know about Jesus is not organic, it doesn't come naturally, and you only can find him in a book. But there are no people that you can point to or people that exist today that actually saw him. We know people that knew Einstein. We know people that are alive that knew many great people. I could talk to people now who actually had met, great people such as John Coltrane and people like that. We don't know anybody that's ever talked. Even Paul never laid eyes on Jesus.
And none of the disciples. Nobody was there with him.
Nobody. So now this is suspect right here.
Yeah.
So if this would not hold up in a court of law.
Right.
He would not be able to, we would not say that this man existed if we were to take the information that we have now and put it in a court of law. He couldn't exist. So if the information that you have about this Jesus and this guy only can be found in a book, then basically if you take that book away, then everything you know about this God is gone now. So I ask people, name me one of my first documentaries, well, not even a documentary, but little mini films I did on YouTube back in 2007 or 6 or 08 or something like that. I asked people, and I still do it to this day, and I still haven't gotten an answer. I say, name me 3 things that you've learned in church that you would not have learned through life tenure. Just 3 things. What have you learned? Nobody can answer that question.
Well, there wouldn't be good things. They would be bad things. Like everyone goes to hell and all those things. They learn that.
Yeah, I mean, 3 things that you would not learn, like non-biblical related, but just 3 things that you've learned that you're carrying on in your life that you actually
3 useful things.
That are useful
things.
Now, that you've learned that you would not have learned for tenure, because just being on earth long enough, the tenure, like I'm a grandfather now, so I know things that I didn't know, 7 years ago. My tenure has now made these things available to me, this knowledge. So I ask people that have been going to church for 40, 50 years, what have you learned?
Well, it's, Jeremiah, it's interesting because as we were talking about this, why would people believe in this, because there's such flimsy evidence. It reminds me, there's a guy, I think his name was Lee Strobel, who wrote a book actually called The Case for Jesus from a lawyer's point of view. So there are people, and I was part of that. I read all those things. I learned all this stuff. And I had a book called The Encyclopedia of Biblical Difficulties, so I could answer all these questions. So people, when they dig into a position, they'll defend it no matter what. And I give you an example. I interview a lot of people who've had near-death experiences. So these are people who have actually say, I've been to the other side. I saw this. This is what I'm reporting. And I was walking with one of my evangelical friends one day, and we were talking about this. And he's like, well, I believe the Bible over this person that you talked to. I said, okay, you believe the Bible. So Paul was on the road to Damascus, had the light, blinded, heard the voice of Jesus from the sky and the whole deal. To me, I think that sounds like a lot like a near-death experience. I said, so if you believe that because you read it in your Bible, why wouldn't you believe Mary, the woman that I interviewed yesterday, who said something very similar happened to her? But this is how indoctrinated people are. They'll believe a book that was written thousands of years ago.
How did he answer that question, Brian? Do you remember? Did he give you an answer?
It was just based upon the fact that he just believes the Bible. I mean, he didn't give me a real solid answer, you know. And when I put that to him, it's just kind of like we moved on to the next thing. But it's and it's interesting because, you know, I wasn't evangelical. I was Pentecostal, then I was evangelical, and this guy and I went to church together. And he goes, Brian, I really just wish you'd read the Bible. I'm going to send you some passages, and if you just study about Jesus, then you know you're going to come back around. I'm like, I've read the Bible cover to cover many times. I've read all these other books, by the way, outside of the Bible, and I have I think a much broader picture. And I'm talking to people who are giving me contemporaneous reports. Okay, this is something that happened yesterday. I don't have to go read what happened to Paul 2,000 years ago, but they're just it all comes back to I have faith in the Bible, you know.
Yeah.
And he even told me I don't need to read anything else. I read the Bible.
They worship the Bible instead of the teachings of Jesus. It's, you know, or it's Paul, or they worship the writings of Paul, or they worship the book, not this stuff.
I'm still trying to figure out Lee Strobel. To this day, I've read the book. I've got the DVD years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense to me, but people will defend their stance regardless. It doesn't matter. I guarantee you, if you go on Google now and type in, because the way we search is very biased. Mm-hmm. A believer is going to search why Jesus exists. A non-believer is going to search why he doesn't.
Right.
You're going to, if you go on Google right now and search why cigarettes are good for you, there's going to be a ton of stuff saying why cigarettes are good. You know, why the benefits of heroin. You're going to get that. So no matter what, you're going to have opposing views. But I also have read the Bible. It took me a while. I've done it 3 times. The whole Bible, but specifically the Old Testament, from Genesis to, I think, was Malachi, I believe. So there were only a few pages in that book that did not allude to some type of violence or death, or, I mean, I think there was 6 to 8 pages, and most of that time it was describing the Ark of the Covenant, or describing the tabernacle, you know, it'd be purple and gold and all this kind of stuff. And then as soon as it was finished with those descriptions, it went back to its death. So as a person who, you know, tries to do right, you know, I hire a lot of felons, you know, at my business. And a person who really enjoys giving to people, I found the Bible very offensive. And so when you say that God is good, my next question is, which one are you talking about? Because if you're talking about that God of the Bible, I know you haven't read the book. Because there's a man, I can't remember, I'm sorry, but he just chronically detailed the people that God murdered in the Bible. It's estimated to be about 25 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, everything was destroy this and kill the children and smote and smite. And I mean, it is very, very graphic, and it's very offensive to a person who considers themselves to be righteous. So I say this: if you do see God, then as a righteous person, we are all obligated to whip his you-know-what for allowing all this stuff. This God is not a preventer. See, we go to this God to protect, to, you know, after things have happened, when someone dies or when some tragedy happens. But God would serve humanity best if he operated in the realm of prevention. Why didn't you prevent the hurricanes from happening? Why didn't you prevent the earthquakes that are taking place in Puerto Rico? Why didn't you stop the bullets to prevent this from happening to this person? So he's not a preventer. but he would best serve humanity in that realm of prevention as opposed to coming to him after the damage has already been done.
One of the really good theories about why that God, the God of the Old Testament, was created to be a psychopathic murderer is because this is Richard Elliott Friedman's theory, and I think it's a good one, that all of those stories were told orally for about 1,000 years. And then at around 500 BC, when the Israelites were taken into captivity in Babylon, they started writing it down. And they started writing it down because it's all our stuff, our culture's gone, our temple's gone, our history's gone. We better start writing this down or it's going to disappear. So that's when they started writing, after telling it verbally for 1,000 years. And in this theory, they're creating this God because it's an expression of their oppressors. Because the Babylonians behaved like that. So they created a God that was expressing what they were experiencing in real life. Everyone's beating us up and killing us.
Absolutely.
That's where it all came from.
That is it. If you look at the map, and because the Jewish nomads were expelled from like 22 or 23 countries, right? And if you follow the map, you can tell they were on foot because it all hugs the coastline where they wound up, okay? And so I need a God, I need a kick-ass God. Someone that, if you do this to us, because you read the Old Testament, it's like, if you mess with the Jews, this God is going to destroy you, he's going to kick your butt. And so we're the chosen people. It's like a person who is an orphan, who never really had any friends. They make up these stories and say, well, my mom really liked me the best, because you were an orphan. So you have these fantastic stories. So now you have the Jewish nomads saying that we're chosen because you basically were not chosen. You were getting kicked out and you were being discriminated against and you were being killed and murdered. So you needed this vicious type of God that would come to your everyday defense. It's so crazy that here we are in 2020, according to the Roman calendar, and we're still accepting this stuff, and it's mind-boggling. But it just goes to show you how vulnerable the brain is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're making some really interesting points here, and most people unfortunately don't dig this deep into the history of the Bible, the history of why did it come about, who were the people that wrote it, why did they write it the way they did. When was it changed? They don't know about the Council of Nicaea. They don't know about how Romans, totally co-opted it. And it takes a lot of work, as we talked about, Jeremiah, to come out of this, to say, let me take a critical look at this because it really rocks people's world. And to even get people to, like I said, I've been trying to I've been posting your film on Facebook, and I'm like, people need to watch this. But we have this, like you said, we search for what reinforces what we already believe. So
absolutely, and it's it's right now where we are. People are intellectually non-curious. In order where we arrived at where we are now because it took a lot of research. You see the books behind me, but it's not just the books; it's the traveling. I've been to many places and I've seen where the resurrection came from and where the the flood stories and all this stuff have come from. But it takes work. It's very easy for me to just accept what my preacher says and just parts of the scripture that he tells me to read, just read it and go home and repeat these things throughout my lifetime. It takes a lot of mental work, and people just don't have the time for that. We're inundated with our jobs. We're inundated with our families. So it's much easier for me to just continue to believe because I hear you, and I have cognitive dissonance now. I'll never forget what you said, Jeremiah, but you're rocking the boat a little too much. And I do notice that a lot of the people that I know who are non-believers, they have a little more time on their hands. People who are inundated with work, they just don't have the time to figure out, to study where this Bible came from and how it, like I tell people, instead of studying the Bible, study how it got here. And people just don't have that type of time. But if you take a little bit of study every day and keep an open mind about it, you can begin to take strides that will free you mentally. And
here's one thing that helps people get free, which is a good segue to the area where Brian and I both work in grief and loss. is just jumping on top of what you're saying. Most people get their Bible story and their religious teaching when they're like 3, 4, 5 years old, right? And you grow up with the Sunday school version of it. And most people, like you said, don't study any further, don't think about it. They just go through their life. And then all of a sudden, one day they're 45 and their kid dies. Now, that's not supposed to happen. And what that does, when you encounter a trauma like that and you're dealing with it with a theological mindset of a 5-year-old, dealing with a huge adult traumatic situation like that, you have zero tools to deal with it. And what happens to a lot of people is that trauma pushes them in to questioning and ultimately post-traumatic spiritual growth. So we can, we don't hope that people have those kinds of traumas, but they do every day. And that's what'll shake people up and wake them up out of that lethargy.
Well, Terri, I'm glad you brought that up, because my question has always been, what does this God do? Like, what is his job description? Okay. Now, you can believe in him your whole life. Guess what? You're still going to get arthritis. You're going to get rheumatism. Okay. You're still going to get high blood pressure. Your team is still going to lose. You're going to experience what everybody else experiences, whether you believe or you don't believe.
Well, not only that, when you're praying for your team to win, some other guy's praying for the other team to win.
Absolutely.
So how does that work?
I know,
Well, that's again, that Terri, what you just, that's that 5-year-old image of God. That's this big scary guy that we put up there that says he's just a big, strong man.
Santa Claus.
Right. Well, I mean, you got people like Steph Curry, right? And now you got James Harden's doing it. These are NBA players. And after a free throw, he points to the sky. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, they asked Steph Curry, how long have you known Jesus or something like that? He said he knew Jesus at 8 years old. Well, I mean, give me a break. Your mom was a missionary. Okay. You went to Davidson School. Davidson is a Christian college. So this is all you've ever known.
Right.
And I doubt if he would even be open to hearing another side. And that's what I tell people. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not part of any crusades or any type of mission. I have no weapons. My thing is to get people to see a different perspective and something that will take the angst off of them, because there's a lot of pressure worrying about what Jesus would do and what Jesus wouldn't do and going to hell. I mean, you stress the hell out of people. You're stressing people out. And in Sweden, they year after year, they always win this happiest people contest in these magazines, People magazine or whatever, the happiest people on earth. And they're among the least religious people on earth.
Right.
They've got one of the best healthcare systems, one of the best educational systems, right? And they asked one of the people there, they said, well, what is it about you guys? He said, we don't have any expectations. We're not expecting someone, to come and save us and rescue us. We'll save ourselves. To me, that leads to happiness. But when you're praying for a parking spot, a good parking spot, you give thanks to this God over a great parking spot that you got at the mall. It just shows how embedded our beliefs are within our everyday lives. And when you shake all of that, you can breathe and begin to function and live normally, and your brain can now do its job.
Yeah, I would just want to say again, I don't call myself a Christian anymore. I'm not a Christian. I don't know if I call myself a believer, because I don't believe. My position now is based on evidence. But what I encourage people to do is just to open up their minds. It doesn't mean that if you watch this film or you read this book, you have to give up everything that you've ever known. But just understand what's being done to you. Understand where it came from. Understand. In the first film, you talked about how they lay out this. It's a sales technique. The first thing when you want to sell somebody something, you have to convince them they have a problem. So you come to somebody and say, this guy's living a happy life. You come up and say, guess what? You're going to hell. What? Yeah, you're going to hell. But I can save you because I have Jesus. And there's a story. It's kind of funny because they did this to an Indian guy, and Native American. And he goes, so if you hadn't told me this, would I not be going to hell? And I go, well, no, you wouldn't be going to hell if we hadn't told you. So then why did you tell me?
Right.
But
Right.
we have to create the problem, right? So we create the problem, we create the solution, and then we've got overlaid on top of this political thing that's been done, the white supremacy, which I think is an excellent point. I don't think most people look at it from that perspective, Jeremiah. And it's been used, especially in this country, to keep us separated and to keep a certain, group of us oppressed. And we've bought into it wholesale without even questioning, why is it that I believe this? And I was like, 13, I think, when Roots came out. And that was the first time I realized, I saw Kuzan Kinte being brought over here. And it's like, this guy had a faith. He had a language. He had a family. Africans had all this stuff. We've been taught to believe, they couldn't even speak to each other. They had no religion. And they were so lucky that, that these people gave them all this stuff. So I think it's really good for people to go back and examine and say, okay, where did this come from? And how much of this do I want to hold on to? And how much of this do I need to let go?
Right. I mean, when you complain about racism, but you have a very narrow view of what racism is and where it came from. You don't think, you never are going to link it to religion. You're just not going to do that. Religion will be the last place that you're going to look for racism. Why did this cop do this? And why is this happening? And I'm telling you, you cannot escape religion. You just can't.
Religion is such a sacred cow. I mean, I blame so many things on religion. So many things in the culture. Racism is one of many. But you're right, religion, you're not supposed to touch it. And for most people, if you said the roots of racism in America are in theology, they would just be horrified. You do not touch our theology with that. And every just violent behavior, mental illness, suicide, so much of this stuff is all rooted in theology. But, I'm so glad, Jeremiah, that you're here in the world showing people the connection between bad theology and racism, because it's really time for that to come out of the closet and not to teach religion like this untouchable sacred cow thing that everyone sees it.
Yeah, Terry and Brian, my hope is that, we take this off the do not talk about list.
Right.
Take God off the do not question list. And I think that it's important for people who are skeptical, who are beginning this journey, to put the articles the or in front of God. Because when you say, I don't believe in God, you're implying that there is one to believe in or not to believe in. So say a God or gods, or this God or whatever. But, I think it's very insulting to your God when you ask me, you don't believe in God? No one would say, do you believe that Terry and Brian are right now having this interview? You would never ask that question, because you can see it right here. So it's insulting that your God, we actually have a choice.
Yeah.
There's a choice that we can exercise to believe or disbelieve.
Well,
that's very insulting.
The Ten Commandments say that, you shall have no other gods before me, which right there suggests that there are other gods.
Exactly. And India has 30 million gods.
Yeah.
30 million gods in India. But of course, your God is the right one. And I just think it's time to just grow up. Here we are. We talk about the technology that's available, but if you look at the church, it's the only institution from slavery that's still in existence, that's still in operation. Mm-hmm. You dress differently now, you talk differently, you have different music, but the church is still the same thing that you had when you were enslaved. And I just think that it's time to grow up and stop focusing on the there and then and focus on the here and now. And that's what religion does. It keeps us focusing on the there and then. And so it doesn't matter, Black people, about, there's no question about the future. You look at the Japanese, for example, and their creation of Honda, okay? That didn't Honda, I think the first one was the early 80s or late 70s, something like that here in the United States. They started that in the 50s. Mm-hmm. They wanted that to happen. You know, they saw that it wasn't going to happen in 20, 30 years from now. Black people don't think like that. We don't set programs in motion that we're not going to benefit from today. The reason is because it doesn't matter. Yeah. Heaven is where we're trying to get to. We're not really trying to establish a future for our children. As long as you have Jesus and heaven, that's all that really matters. It really is a sickness. And like I said, I'll say it again. I've said it once, I'll say it again. Religion is a perversion of the brain.
You know, I love that you keep saying growing up, because Bishop John Shelby Spong, who is a friend of mine, says, and he's all over YouTube saying this, you know.
I tried to interview him. I did.
Well, he had a stroke a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So he's not doing interviews or traveling or anything.
Right, I got you.
Yeah, that's been about 3 years. But he says, you know, being born again means that if you're born again, you're a newborn baby. You're an infant. You're just a blob of brainstem. You don't need to be born again. You need to grow up. Exactly. The idea is to mature, not to go back to infancy.
So, these books, I'm often, you know, I ask, when do we graduate? You know, how often are you going to refer to this scripture?
Yeah.
You know, throughout my life. Like, what other book do we read and just continue, like, for 50 years? Say the same thing when we already know it. The Bible is an exception to that because it's based off of life and death, eternal hell, which is so, it's so crazy to think that you're going to burn for eternity. I mean, listen, we all should know this, that the sun has a time limit.
Right.
You know, it's got a time limit. So we see stars dying all the time and creating these massive black holes and quasars and things like that. Our sun is going to expire. So this notion of foreverness, like the witnesses living on earth with the lions and tigers and bears, is erroneous because this earth will one day expire.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jeremiah, it's been really fascinating, you know, talking to you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and discuss your two films, which I feel are very important work. So I hope people watch them, and I want to review what they are. They're Contradiction, The Question of Faith, which examines the saturation of churches in African-American communities. And the new one is Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism in America. And they're both available on Amazon Prime.
That's correct. And I want to thank you guys. This has been fun. Brian, thank you so much, man. I love your whole setup here. I mean, I really like this setup. I've done 1,000 interviews, but this is one setup that I really like. Terry, thanks for reaching out to me. And I looked at your work. You're fascinating. I can't wait to meet you in person. And it's been a blast. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, I want to give people where they can contact you too. It's filmfreeway.com/Jeremiah Camara, and that's Jeremiah, Jeremiah.
Well, actually, the best way is through Slave Sermons at Gmail.
Okay, Slave Sermons at Gmail.
Just like the mini series on YouTube, Slave Sermons, plural, at gmail.com. You can reach me there. You can also visit JeremiahCamara.com.
Awesome, man. It's been great meeting you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks so much, guys.
Terry, any last words?
I'm so thrilled to meet you, Jeremiah, and I cannot wait to hang out with you and all these other brilliant people that are going to be there in Vancouver, including Nathan Phelps, the son of Fred Phelps from the Westboro Baptist Church. He's going to be there. Marlene Winnell. These are really important people, and I just feel so thrilled that I get to be around them.
Congratulations to Marlene Winnell. I met her about 6 years ago in San Francisco, and we've stayed in touch. I just love what she's doing. Her patience, and her love for people comes blaring through in her work. She does retreats. She lives near me, and she has retreats. I don't know how often, which is recovering from religion week retreats. So Daryl Ray does the same thing. Yeah,
he does.
So I really thank them for considering me to be a part of this big event. I'm looking forward to it. Brian, will you be there?
I won't be there, but I'm sure I'll find you somewhere, man.
You'll find me, no doubt, man. And listen, when I come home, we'll get together, man.
For sure.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I want to make it really easy for you to reach me. So just send me a text to 31996 and simply text the word growth, GROWTH. In fact, you can right now just say, "Hey Siri," send a message to 31996, and when Siri asks you what you want to send, just say growth. You can do the same thing with OK Google. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief, the number 2, growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.